Broadcasting from the Business RadioX studio in Orlando, Florida, it's time for Regions Business Radio Orlando. Regions Business Radio Orlando is presented by Regions Bank. Brave the beginning. Member FDIC.
Welcome to the Regions Business Radio Orlando podcast, presented by Regions Bank, member FDIC, and an equal housing lender. I'm your host, Scott Wall, and I'm a commercial banking leader with Regions Bank here in our Central Florida market. And my guest today is a friend who I've known for a while. His name is Azim Sajou. He's the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of ARC Hospitality, and he's here with us. Hey, Azim, good afternoon and welcome to the podcast.
Scott, good afternoon, and so great to be here.
I thought maybe we'd start with your background. Maybe talk about that if you could. That'll start us off.
Yeah, so I grew up in the hotel business. My parents came here as immigrants, and my mom in 1978 read an article in the Reader's Digest about hotels. And we took our first family vacation around that time. We were living in Long Island and came down to Orlando. And the winters in Long Island were tough, and the winters in Orlando are always really nice. So they were sold just by the weather, and they had no credit. We were immigrants, but they were able to purchase a hotel on a lease purchase option. And the purchase option included some triggers where the seller would hold a second mortgage if my parents met the financial criteria and the performance criteria, which they did. And they were able to purchase that hotel in Ocala, Florida. And we moved here in 1981.
1981. And what was the brand of that first hotel they purchased, Azim?
The first hotel my parents purchased was an Econo Lodge.
1981. So then, okay, you grow up in Ocala. I think you end up going to University of Florida either for undergrad, and didn't you go to law school? And I think you were a practicing attorney for some period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I went to Davidson College for undergraduate school and got a degree in economics, and then came back and went to University of Florida for law school and practiced law for a while. Okay,
so I got to think your law background probably has assisted you greatly as a chief executive officer at this point. Is that fair to say?
Yes. My law background has helped me immensely. The area of the law in which I practiced was employment law. So I learned a lot about what creates and motivates employees to sue their employers. Florida is an at-will state. Firm at which I worked primarily represented plaintiffs. So we had to be very selective on the cases that we took. So usually there were long-term employees who came across really well, who had a good track record until something changed in their circumstance. And usually it came down to just treating people right. If you treat people right, if you respect them, if you're fair, you're going to avoid a lot of those employment lawsuits. But if you're not, and you have a long-term team member and they get their feelings hurt, a plaintiff's lawyer is usually going to find a way to turn that into a legally actionable claim.
So we'll come back, Azim, to some of your leadership pillars, let's call them, but I have a feeling that, treating people right and with respect is going to be one of them. So more to come on that. And you're a practicing attorney for a while, and obviously you've got this family pedigree within the hospitality space. What was the point at which you decided to get back into hospitality, and maybe how did that go?
So it happened around 2001-ish. Right around 9/11, as you'll see with my career in hospitality, I have a knack for good timing. I had an opportunity to grow with my brother, who was at the time very growth-minded, and was able to join what was our family business at the time. We grew that business and went through some major renovations and had to navigate cash flow and learn about that and learn about construction and lien releases and subcontractors and all of that stuff. And then in 2004, we built our first hotel, and a lot of lessons from that, which we thought we learned. And then we thought, look, we can raise some friends and family money. Credit at the time was a lot easier than it is now. Borrow a lot of money, probably more money than we ought to have borrowed.
Yeah.
And instead of building one more hotel, we can build 4 hotels, which, given how impeccable my timing has been in this industry, the 4th hotel we opened the day the markets crashed, our Hampton Inn in Leesburg. And I went through a really tough period, but learned some great lessons during that time period.
And Azim, I'm assuming you're talking about, let's call it the 2008 to 2009, 10-ish. That was a heck of a time to be in real estate within any type of real estate or asset class, particularly the hospitality space.
That's true. That's exactly right. I'm talking about the period starting from 2008.
Yeah, gosh, talk about lessons learned all the way around, right?
A lot of lessons learned during that time period. And I think lessons that are still applicable now. Lessons related to be transparent and timely in your financial reporting. Don't hide the ball. People are going to find out one way or the other, your close partners, your investors, your lenders. They may as well know the truth of exactly what's happening. A second is have a plan for the asset in terms of its maintenance, its upkeep. You can't cut your way out of a down economy, whether it's the Great Recession, whether it's COVID, especially in the hospitality business, which is capital intensive. If you try to cut your way out of a down economy, I think it's a race to the bottom. Continue to make investments in your people and your processes, especially during that time. Your lenders and your investors are going to respect you when you do that. And then, be accountable as a leader. People are counting on you.
Well, as you, and I want to transition to this newer business that you're running point on, which is very exciting. But the last question on that hotel portfolio is, was it the same with 4 properties as it is with, 30 properties? I mean, the scale's different now, but you really came from just that first one in, what'd you say, 2001?
Yes, it is different. Where it's the same is that I think that you develop an empathy with 4 hotels or 5 hotels towards the operational side of the business. The fact that every day is different in ops. One day your night auditor calls out, the next day the health inspector is there, a month later the brand franchisor inspector is there, and every day is different. Your computers crash. You have some great success stories. It can provide an incredible amount of meaning and purpose in life, especially if you're leading on the ops side. You can help a lot of lives who need to be helped. But it's as intense as the practice of law.
Yeah, and a lot more employees, right?
Yeah, yes.
Recently, within the last year or two, you pivoted, and there's a new business venture. It's ARC is the acronym or the word. Maybe talk about that. What is it? How'd that come about? And then we can go from there.
So ARC is a venture that first started with a business partner of mine from Ambridge Hospitality, which is the largest hotel third-party management company in the world. His name is Aaron Walker. We had an existing team in Ocala that I thought was very talented. And the question is how do we take them from where we are now to where we want to go from a growth perspective and grow them with us together? Aaron came to me. Aaron had invested in some of our hotels, and we began to talk about scaling third-party management and how we scale it and maintain a culture, which was very exciting to me. And I had known Aaron for over 10 years, and he had visited us with bringing some of his night auditors from some of the hotels that he oversaw in his portfolio, really interested in us, had invested with us. And I was like, you know what? If we're going to scale third-party management, not commoditize it, but truly scale it and scale our culture, this would be a great value add partner with whom to do this.
Just for clarity, Azim, when you say third party, these would be properties / hotels that you don't own, but you are managing or operating on behalf of an owner. Is that right?
That is correct. Third party management by definition is hotels that we don't own but are operating for another owner.
Okay. All right. So this is a pretty new venture, right?
It is very new. We've opened up an office in Dallas so that we're in the central time zone, close to 2 major airports, MSA top 25 market. But we're leveraging off of our existing team in Ocala. The goal is to grow everybody. Some of our team members have come up through the ranks and have grown with us. Others have tremendously compelling stories of personal and professional growth and perseverance in hospitality. And the goal for ARC is to grow all of us together. As we got into the third-party management space, and I began to experience it more. We launched ARC May 1st. I had by nature come from an entrepreneurial type development ownership background. So when we launched ARC, the majority of the hotels that I was involved in were hotels that I had varying degrees of ownership. And what I began to see is that in this hotel space, there were several opportunities that we could pursue given the talent that we had. And it was third-party management and scaling it and scaling our culture, but it was also scaling the development and acquisition side of our business, and the investor ownership side of our business.
Did you see that coming when you went?
Not.
Okay.
I did not. Scott, that's a great question. Did I see that coming on the development side? Absolutely no. I thought last year at this time, 60-40, that Aaron, who had been with Ambridge for a very long time, very valued and respected in the third-party management space, 60-40, he leaves and joins up and we become business partners, but there was a very real chance that he didn't. Ambridge wanted him to stay, and he had some pretty strong opportunities even outside of Ambridge to pursue. On the development side, I did not see creating a separate vertical just to specialize in development. Last year at this time, frankly, even at the end of Q1 of this year, I didn't see it coming. But we just signed lease for office space in Raleigh for our development arm, for our development vertical, and have added several very talented team members to that development portion of our business.
Congrats on the space in Raleigh, number one. And then Azim, would those be ground up new properties that you're making mention of?
60% we're hopeful will be acquisition of existing hotels, 40% new construction. The goal of the development entity would be to do a minimum of $800 million between acquisition and new development over 5 years.
That's a lot of capital deployed.
And a lot of equity to find.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm playing the lottery every Saturday, the Powerball.
I think you're playing the long game, and I think you're going to be just fine.
Thank you.
I mean, this is aspirational and incredible plans for this. And it's funny how it came about from the third-party platform onto the development side, as you discussed. But it made me think, for listeners that are, Azim, entrepreneurial or business owners, talk a little bit, if you would, about, call it investment, wealth creation. I mean, this is where you're going. You're going out in deep waters with some really big plans, and this is very exciting. There's got to be some risk involved here, right?
The risk involved is significant. When you're trying to create wealth, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's just not. And especially going through 2008, and the COVID downturn was the fifth downturn that my family has experienced living in the United States. It's real. And during those downturns, it's like trying to squeeze juice out of a dry orange. It's really hard, if not impossible, regardless of how hard you squeeze. That being said, the U.S. is the greatest wealth creation engine in the world. If you have the intestinal fortitude to hold, have a plan to maintain your asset and grow your asset, understand that you can't cut your way out of a bad economy, and then are transparent with your reporting. And by transparency with the reporting, it's important that I say it's not just with your lender and your equity investors, but it's also with your team, right? They got to know that you're right in it with them. And if you can do all of that, then your bet is that the United States is going to continue to do what it's done over the last 75 some odd years. The economy comes back, it rebounds, there's appreciation, there's value creation, and you can operate a profitable business, grow that business, or exit from that business.
We've had other business owners on this podcast, and what I do at the bank, we surely meet them all the time. And I think what you're speaking of is having some, I'll call them pillars or foundational approaches to leadership, and maybe those get you through, cycles, right? I mean, you said your parents 5 cycles. Is that what you said, Azim?
Yes.
And you and I have been on. We've probably had, maybe 3 and arguably 4, but for sure 3. It feels like. Let me pivot, Azim. more on the kind of the operational side, the people side. So one comment I got to ask you, and I remember talking to you about this a couple of years ago, post-COVID, how do you think of the consumer coming to your properties now post-COVID? What are they expecting? Are they different?
There are some differences. First and foremost, there's a statistically significant portion of the consumer population that doesn't want daily housekeeping service. That's a huge change in our industry. It's a big, big difference. Now, that comes with its pros and cons. In the short run, one of the pros from an ownership perspective is you should have better GOPs, profit margins. One of the trade-offs is when the rooms do need to be cleaned, the cleaning is more intense because you haven't had someone in that room regularly. Not all the consumers are subscribing to the continental breakfast anymore or expecting the level of food options in the free continental breakfast that they used to. The expectation on the Wi-Fi and the bandwidth and that it work well and be fast and the connectivity be there is more than ever before, because you have travelers now who are these leisure guests where, Monday through Wednesday, they may be there for business and then they'll tack on a Thursday or Friday with their family. But during that leisure time, they want to be able to work out of their room. And I think that it puts more pressure on these hotels and their Wi-Fi working and working well. I think that hotels are also going to have to reimagine their public spaces to make them more conducive for that kind of guest, to spread out, connect with people that they might want to meet with in the area. But I think public spaces are going to become more important. Fitness spaces are going to become more important as guests stay for longer. And in that regard, the extended stay space or segment in the hotel industry continues to be a leader in terms of growth because guests are staying for longer. The extended stay room is a larger room with a bigger refrigerator. Some of them have stove tops. And I think that that's going to continue to be a big growth area in our industry. And lastly, I think that, labor is going to have to be reimagined and how we use labor, whether it's more of the keyless entry where you can check in on the mobile app. But, these entry-level jobs in our business are hard and they're taxing. I think people have expectations now. The team member, the employee have expectations of more than just being a unit. They want to be part of something that has a culture and a vision and something bigger than that. And I think as a result of that, there's going to have to be more automation in our space also.
Well, you just touched on something relative to people, and I really wanted to get behind, you've talked a little bit, Azim, about, transparency and both with your banks and your investors and your people, having a plan, updating the rooms. But when you think about from a leadership perspective as a CEO with many, many employees in this umbrella of companies on both sides, what are some, and maybe you just answered the question, Azim, about people and how you treat them. I think your mission statement speaks at ARC about reputation, relationships, and returns. Maybe unpack that and speak about how you think about how important the employee is and how you guys look at the business with your folks. Maybe your biggest asset aside from the rooms.
How we look at team members as our biggest asset in our business model is really important. It starts with educating them. When you have a frontline team member making an hourly wage, and they see that your hotel, let's say it's 100 rooms that is sold out for 3 nights, it's Daytona 500 weekend at $150 rate. That's a lot of money. And you have to educate them on the revenues, the expenses, and net, what that means. We have a presentation that we share with our team. It's called Hotel Investment 101. And it talks about and educates them on the world of ownership. And part of that is educating them on why that matters to them in their growth. If you're not part of a growing business, well, chances are you're not going to grow. You're going to hit a ceiling, right? Yeah. And so why that matters to them. We spread ownership out to our longer term team members. So when a hotel distributes its profit to its shareholders, they're also getting a check. We have spent time educating them in housekeeping huddles, and by them I mean like our frontline housekeeping team members, on what EBITDA is and why that matters to them, and why checking in an order properly can make a tenfold difference on a hotel's valuation, and in turn impacts our ability to go to a bank like yours, Scott, and say, look, Marriott or Hilton or Choice is requiring that we do a renovation or a refresh. We'll put half of that money in. We want to borrow the other half. And why those EBITDA numbers really matter to them.
What a way to build camaraderie is not the right word, but a frontline employee that might feel like they're part of something, right? Something much bigger than just a job.
Absolutely. Our team members, we look at them as our equity investors in some way also, because they don't get back their time, right? Time is something that you can't give someone back once it's spent. And they're giving us their time. And we want to make sure that they understand the business from beyond just, hey, did you turn that room in 20 minutes? Or, hey, did we meet our GOP target for this month? They truly understand the business and how it works.
In your career arc, are there any mistakes that turned into kind of North Star lessons? Anything jump out at you, one or two?
Yes, mistakes that turned into North Star lessons. One of my biggest areas, my underbelly, is I still am a work in progress as it relates to numbers. I'm not a good numbers guy. I want to spend time with people. I want to spend face-to-face time engaging with people. If you have me sit in a room and look at P&Ls and balance sheets all day long and talk about credit swaps, and I'm going to be asleep or bored out of my mind. But we are in a for-profit business. We have investors, we have lenders. The P&L matters. The balance sheet matters. And that definitely is one of my North Star lessons, is if you're in a for-profit business, other people are trusting you with their livelihoods, you got to know that P&L and balance sheet. And on a bigger level, I think we all have strengths, right? And of course, we want to play off of those strengths, but we also have to be aware of our weaknesses and plan for that, whether it's hiring the right people to compensate for that and or educating ourselves a little bit better in that. So that was a big North Star. That's a big North Star lesson for me. A couple of other things. One is you can't teach experience, right? You can only experience it. So we all have, when we're younger, big dreams and goals and ambitions and vision. But what life teaches us is that the road there isn't a straight line. There's a lot of turns and twists. And through those turns and twists, as painful as they might be, sometimes there are lessons there. You just can't teach that until you've experienced it. And you've done your best, you've tried your hardest, you've given that venture your all, but the results still aren't there. I talked earlier about intentional fortitude. Easy to talk about, really hard to do, right? You've dotted all your I's and crossed your T's, but it's still not there.
On that note, Azim, it's funny, I think really agree with you on the comment about, incredible lessons learned from making mistakes. But you almost sometimes don't know that you're learning a lesson in the moment, right? It takes reflection later and probably years and experience to look back and say, wow, here's how that could have gone. I won't make that mistake again for whatever reason. So really, really appreciate that advice, and I agree with you.
But those are two big lessons for me over the last, especially the last 20 some odd years that I've been very active in the hotel space.
Yeah. Well, okay. As we kind of close here, Azim, I got a couple more. Just think about folks that might be listening, whether they're within hospitality or not. I'd like to think that we've got entrepreneurs or folks thinking about starting a business that might listen to this podcast. What advice would you give someone that was contemplating, risking capital and starting something up, whatever that may be?
The advice I'm going to give to someone who's contemplating risking capital or a startup business is the same advice, and hopefully I'm recalling it correctly, that Gandalf gave Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit. Take a few trusted friends with you and have faith that you'll find courage in unexpected places.
I love that. I'm one of my favorite books growing up I would not have thought that we were going to quote Lord of the Rings on this podcast. Well done. And aside from Lord of the Rings, any other books that you would tell someone that's young, that's interested in business and starting their own business? Anything that was important for your journey, Azim?
Shoe Dog, the book by Phil Knight. I think a very real and honest accounting of starting and growing a business and the road ahead of you. I highly, highly, highly recommend that. And generally, I'll tell someone who's starting a business in terms of books and reading is that continuing education is huge. You're not in a classroom anymore where you're going to be in a lecture setting and gain knowledge that way. Continuing education is going to come through reading getting to read an article in the Wall Street Journal, a book. It comes through networking. Scott, I have been fortunate to meet smart people like you in my life, and I network and talk. And in those conversations, you'll get a piece of knowledge here and a piece of knowledge there and a piece of knowledge from this person. And your mind will automatically string that together in terms of themes of what works and what doesn't work. And don't give up on the continuing education.
Yeah, really good advice. And Azim, it's funny with the networking piece, you just never know, right? I mean, you never know where something might lead to. So I think that's really well said. Hey, first of all, thank you for coming on the podcast, and really congratulations on all you and your family are doing in the hospitality space and beyond. You got some incredible plans. I can't wait to see it happen, and keep it going.
Scott, thank you. I look forward to connecting with you again in the new year. Thanks for what you do.
That sounds great. I'd like to thank our guests, and I want to thank our listeners to Regions Business Radio Orlando, presented by Regions Bank, member FDIC, and an equal housing lender. You can enjoy our episodes anytime by visiting businessradiox.com and selecting the Orlando studio and then clicking on Regions Business Radio. This program is also available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to the program so you don't miss any of our future episodes. I'm Scott Wall, and you've been listening to Regions Business Radio Orlando on Business Radio X.
Regions reminds its customers that they should be vigilant about fraud and security and that they are responsible for taking action to protect their computer systems. Fraud prevention requires a continuous review of your policies and practices as the threat evolves daily. There is no guarantee that all fraudulent transactions will be prevented or that related financial losses will not occur. Visit regions.com/stop-fraud or speak with your banker for further information on how you can prevent fraud. Regions Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. This information is general in nature and is not intended to be accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. Regions believes this information to be accurate when recorded, but it cannot ensure that it will remain up to date. Consult an appropriate professional concerning your specific situation. The information should not be construed as a recommendation of a specific course of action for any individual or business. All Regions products and services are subject to qualification requirements, terms, conditions, fees, and credit approval.